So today we're talking about creating remarkable characters. Now, what do I mean when I say remarkable? I mean unforgettable. You say the name of that character, and if the person has read that series, they go, I know that guy who did X, Y, and Z, and you're able to remember the entirety of that person and the story. An example of unremarkable characters is when you have to go, who is that again? Even though they've been in the story multiple times by now. That is not something you want to have happen. Is it acceptable in a story? Yeah, but it's ultimately frustrating for the reader and not the goal. The goal is to create characters that are so unique that your reader goes, I know that guy. I know what he likes. I know what he looks like. I know what he sounds like. I love this character, or alternatively, I hate that guy. He's the worst, but he is the villain, so that's the point. You want to make sure that they stick in their minds. All right. So first thing that we're going to talk about is culture/life story. So this is a great way to make characters unique because of the fact that we live in a very diverse world. Even if you grew up in an area where 99% of the people are X religion, or 99% of the people believe in this specific thing, or have these certain traits about them, like, for example, the Southern accent. That does not mean that you can't have people who go out of the norm. If you have not experienced a certain culture or a certain lifestyle, or life story, then explore it. Try to really research it. Try to make sure that they don't feel like they are just a cardboard cutout version of you turned Southern. Make sure that they become their own unique character. If you want to have them believe in a Jewish faith and you are not Jewish, do a ton of research. Figure out what that looks like. Figure out what that would make them like as a person. Figure out what kinds of different things that means. If you grew up in a family as a single child and you want to write about a person who has 7 siblings, research about it. Ask people who live with 7 siblings what it's like to make sure that, yes, we have all sorts of life stories in here. If you ever need to be like, hey, does anyone have this specific life situation? Go ahead and ask. That's what writers groups are for, to help give you resources. Make sure you research about life outside of yourself, because even though it is good to write about what you know, ultimately just writing about what you know is sometimes what creates characters that all seem carbon copy color paste, because of the fact that you're basically creating the same character with a slightly different accent. And that's not going to create original and unique characters. If you want original and unique characters, you need to make sure that they all have a drastically different life story, because ultimately we all have a drastically different life story. Even if I grew up with one sibling. I had 2 siblings, one of them passed away. That is a very unique experience, right? And even if I met someone else who had that exact same experience, they might have an entirely different feeling about it. They might have an entirely different experience for that. It's important that you talk about these experiences and learn about these experiences and learn about what other people feel like. All right. Next, when making your characters memorable, you need to make sure that their names make them memorable. Now, you can make your characters unique in other ways. You can have like Timmy, Tommy, Terry, and Todd, and they all start with T, right? So that's going to get very confusing in the beginning. But then you might say that, Terry has a fear of heights, and so they're all climbing up a mountain and they're all fine except for Terry. That helps us know who Terry is, and that Terry is different. So you can have very similar names and make them all different. However, if you want it to just be super easy on your character, the best thing you can do is to not name them anything similar unless you have to. If you have to and you're like, hey, this is just the name of the character, then go for it. But if you ultimately are like, well, I could change Terry's name to Brad, then do it. Make it so that they're different and they're easy to tell apart. With that being said, make sure that your names don't just have, because sometimes the first letter isn't necessarily the problem. You could have a character named Arietti and a character named Arnold. those are similar, but at the same time, one is masculine, one is feminine. So it's going to be a lot harder to get those two mixed up, right? However, if you have Arietti and then Erin, that's going to be like, okay, wait. That's a lot of similar letters there. So just be careful when naming your characters that you don't have too many similarities between the letters, or like I said, if you do, purposely make them as different as possible. Even if they're supposed to be identical twins. If they're supposed to be identical twins, like, Fred and George, they have drastically different names, but they act almost very similar, right? And so in some ways it's easy to get them mixed up in spite of the fact that their names are different. But that's part of their whole personality and their whole character, is the fact that they are so similar you can't tell them apart. So that is part of it too. I just want to make sure that I'm mentioning all the caveats, because unfortunately when it comes to characters, there's so much diversity that it's hard to say don't do this or do this. It's just saying, like, when in this situation, do this. Alright, next thing that you want to do is relate to your characters. Don't be afraid to relate to your characters. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, if I make them too much like myself, then people won't enjoy the character, or they'll think it's a self-insert. You can create a self-insert character and still have them be completely different and completely unique from you. You can start with them being very similar to you. Grew up in a similar household, grew up with a similar amount of siblings, grew up under a similar, kind of religious structure. But ultimately, what happens to them is going to change who they are. And that's what you need to remember. If you do start with a self-insert, ultimately, that self-insert is going to be nothing like you by the end of the book, because of the fact that their life experiences are going to change who they are. And it's going to make them a unique individual that is nothing like you. But, that being said, don't be afraid to relate to them at the beginning and be like, you know what? This character's an awful lot like me. There's nothing wrong with that. Writing what you know can be a very powerful tool. It can also be a powerful tool because oftentimes people relate to how you're feeling, and then when they relate to the character, it can make them stick in their mind a lot more because they go, oh man, I know how that feels, that sucks. Or alternatively, hey, I really like that thing too, and it makes it so you connect with them. Ultimately, it's about creating a connection as if your character was a real person. Alright, next thing that we're going to talk about, I'm going to give verbal examples, so I'm not going to write them all up on the board, but dialogue. Dialogue can show the unique differences between a character very directly. For example, do they use slang? Are they straightforward? Do they say very little? Are they eloquent? Are they dramatic? Are they super boastful? Now, in this example that I'm going to give out loud, I'm going to say every single sentence is the characters trying to tell another character that they love a certain song and that they think the singer was cool. That is the basic premise of every sentence that I tried to do. But I tried to make them distinctly sound different based on different qualities. So, you're going to feel like these are not the same characters at all, but they are trying to convey the same thing, and that's the point. So, for example, if your character speaks with a lot of slang, they may say, y'all, that song ate! The singer was so slay! And and you're just going, if you don't use slang, you might go, what? Just blinking in confusion. Whereas if the other person uses slang, they'd go, yeah! And they'd just totally fall in with it. That's going to help distinctly give the character a personality just with that dialogue line. That dialogue line was super short, and yet you know a lot about the character now. You know they use slang, you know that they feel very passionately about this specific song, you know kind of how they talk. Those are all very important things to getting to know a character and remembering who they are. Now, again, same premise, different idea. I really liked that song. The singer's voice was so pretty. That gives off a more shy tone, a more like, yeah, it was really nice. And even though, again, same concept, but the way it's said is going to give us a lot about who the character is. If you have the same dialogue for every character, you might want to reconsider because of the fact that no one person is going to have the same dialogue. They might sound similar if they're best friends. I know my friends and I talk similarly and have similar dialect and dialogue things, but that does not mean we are the same. we still talk distinctly differently, even if we have similarities that overlap. All right, next one. If a person was just being, quite frank, I enjoyed that. That tells you that the person doesn't really care too much, that they're just like, yeah, it was cool. Very calm, very cool, very chill. Now, if you wanted to do a very posh person, you'd do something like, that song was positively exquisite. The singer's voice was truly mellifluous. And then you're like, oh, I see. This person's very rich, very high society, very eloquent. Or at least they want to try to be. Alternatively, you could use this dialogue line to show them pretending to be very rich and very posh, and then the next minute they're like, I hate having to pretend to be that way. And that would also give us a very distinct character that would make us go, oh, that's interesting. They don't actually like acting like this, so why are they acting like this? That intrigue, that questioning is going to make us want to dive deeper. All right. We're going to move away from dialogue. So, now we're going to talk about character descriptions. So, this is an important part to understanding who they are. Even if you don't say what skin color they are, what eye color they have, what hair color they have, what they wear is going to be definitive to them. If you don't tell us what they're wearing, we could have a very different impression. We could be thinking, oh, this person is super wealthy, and then it turns out they're wearing rags. That's important to know. That's important to tell us what they're wearing, because that's going to give us a different impression of who they are. Are they wearing a cheetah print skin tight outfit? That's going to be like, okay, that's a very distinct vibe, versus wearing like skinny jeans and a crop top is also going to give a very specific vibe. Whereas wearing a sweatshirt and sweatpants is also going to give a very different vibe. Yes, question.
So I was just wondering, I thought of an example in a book that I had read where like the characters spoke in a very, like how we were saying, like posh, sort of like learned thing, but then her clothes, but then she was like sleeping next to a fireplace, and you're like, how did we get here?
Exactly.
So,
yes, that is a great example. It can be utilized to also show the difference. When you have dialogue that doesn't match the clothing style, that makes you go, I want to know more about this character. This character is very unique. Thank you. I like that. With description, however, you also want to take into mind how they talk. Like you said, also if they're sleeping by a fireplace, they might have, ash on their face or things like that. That's going to give us a very different feeling about who they are than if you don't say that. It also is going to change our feeling about who they are as a person. Now, the last thing I am going to talk about, even though it is not completely necessary, it is in some ways become necessary as part of society, and that is diversity. If you want to write a character that is African American and you are not African American, make sure you do your research first. Because you didn't grow up in that culture, and that's going to make it difficult. Or alternatively, if you are Latino and you want to write about a white girl, you are not a white girl. So do your research, figure out what that's like, figure out what that culture is like, because that is going to be distinctly different. With that being said, skin color, eye color, hair color are all things that we should not judge a person by. I want to make that very clear. However, that does not mean that the reader will not go, oh, that's interesting, and definitely take it into account as part of their character. For example, there was a TV show I was watching recently. If I had been reading it as a book and not known that the character was black, and then had the police officer who arrested them accused of racism, I would have been very confused. I would have been like, racism? They're white. Or alternatively, racism? What race are they now? Racism against which race? There are lots of races. When you don't describe a person, people default to whatever race they are, which is why I said white for me, because people tend to default to whatever race they are. It's not a racist thing, it's just a thing where people don't know what to fill in, and so they fill in whatever color they are. That does make it incredibly difficult, though, because if their race is an important part of the story, or even if it's not an important part of the story, it can make it so people end up having issues with, like, being able to feel that the character is real, because then if so-and-so says that the character is blonde and so-and-so says the character has black hair, you're going to have a whole fandom of people yelling at each other. And granted, that happens anyway, even with you telling them what hair color they have, but it happens less.
There are a lot of fandoms.
You're just like, yes, the fandoms. That being said, like I said, it shouldn't be what defines their character, but it can help us to understand their character better. For example, let's use Avatar: The Last Airbender as a great example. Sokka and Zuko are clearly, when you look at them, not the same race. We don't know what races they have in their world, but they're clearly not the same race. That not only helps distinguish who is who, but it also helps us distinguish how they grew up. It also helps us to know how their culture has affected them. And even if they didn't grow up in that race, in that specific culture that their race matches, that also can tell us a lot about the character. If, for example, they look Chinese and they act super, super, super American white girl, maybe they grew up in a super, super American white girl town, and so they kind of became that way as they grew up, even though their racial features would say that they have different ancestry. Yes, question?
This is usually more used in like comic books, shows.
Yeah.
For rememberability, take a character and like copy and paste it or use the outline, or use like basic shapes for the body, such as the hair or shoulders. That'll help remember simply.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with writing. You want the building blocks to be something that you can look at and go, I recognize that. I know who that is. I can feel a certain way about them, whether positive or negative. If they're the villain, you might be like, ooh, I hate that guy. But that's, like I said, that's the point. I like that example. Thank you. That was a great example. All right, moving on from character physical descriptions. Another thing that, of course, makes your characters memorable is backstory. Now, the trick with backstory is making sure you're not giving backstory in a way that info dumps. Now, because I'm doing a recording, I'm going to give a definition of info dumping. However, if you already know what this is, that's okay. If you don't, also good. Either way, I'm going to give a definition. Info dumping is when you take a bunch of information that does not fit within the current plot or scene, and you just dump it on the reader. For example, they could be in the middle of having a tea party, and they're just talking, and then all of a sudden, you go into the character's head, and she's like, I was thinking about the time I was in the war 40 years ago, and you're like, this has nothing to do with the tea party you were at, ma'am. Like, what is happening? Now, if you were to introduce that she'd been part of a war by saying she had scars on her hands and therefore she had a hard time picking up the teacup because she had so many scars on her hands, that gives us backstory in a way that is relevant to the moment without info dumping. Make sure that when you give details, you give them through action and through the scene and through the plot. Use another thing to give us that information. Speaking of which, you may have heard that if something is not relevant to the plot, it shouldn't be in the story. False and true. False, because when you are writing a novel, it should go, is this important to the plot? Is this important to the character? Is this important to the world building? Make it at least two of them. So if it's important to the character and the world building, doesn't matter if it's not important to the plot, it is still important. However, with short stories, that is true. That is why people say this, because with short stories, it is incredibly hard to world build and do character building outside of the plot and still meet your word count goals. That is part of the problem. However, if you are writing a novel, as long as it hits two of those things, world building and plot, world building and character and plot, then you're good. The issue comes when it is purely just one function. You are just getting to know the character. You are just getting to know the world. You are just getting to know the plot. It should never be just one thing. It should always be at least two. If it is just one thing and you have to get that detail in and there's no other way to do it with more than one thing being added, then I would say do it short. Keep it a couple of sentences. just get it out of the way. But if it is part of the whole scene, make sure that it has at least 2 points to it. All right. Moving on to the next point. All right. We're going to talk about skills. Now, skills set us apart from everyone else, right? Some people are really good at writing. Some people are, I've actually talked to some people where I say, oh yeah, I love writing. And they look at me and go, I don't even know where I'd start if I attempted to write something. And I'm like, oh, well, you can always just practice. And they're like, no, like, seriously, I can't even. And that's okay. We all have different skills. And that's what makes us who we are. Having these different skills are very important to defining your characters. Is one character super, super good at being a mechanic? Is another character super good at being a leader? Is a different character completely and utterly seemingly useless and likes to do drugs? That is still a skill. It's not a good skill, but it's a skill. And so, having no skills is still a skill. Really? In the regard that it is a defining, unique trait of the character, and it is something that defines who they are and what they do. So, keep in mind that when developing these skills for the characters, you want them to all be unique. You want to make sure that they are all different. For example, we're going to go back to Avatar: The Last Airbender because it's a great example, and for those of you who haven't watched it, please do, because it's a great example of good writing. They all have drastically different skills. Aang is really good at making things up on the fly, right? The very last dead second, and he's like, I've got an idea! And then you have Sokka, who is incredibly good at coming up with things so creative and ludicrous that you go, what? And then it somehow works anyway. And then you have Katara, who is very motherly, who takes care of a lot of things, who makes sure they are responsible. That is an incredibly important skill. She makes sure the other two don't die. Then you have Toph, who is incredibly good at self-defense. She's incredibly good at being very blunt and being very frank. And then you finally have Zuko. He's a little bit of a hothead, right? But at the same time, he also has a lot of great skills with regard to knowing a lot about the Fire Nation, knowing a lot about the kinds of things that make someone more powerful and less powerful, and also learning about control. Because he was a hothead, he's learning more about that, right? So, with skills, it is important that you arm your party of adventurers, so to speak, with the proper skills to get through the story. And if they don't have those skills, you gotta make sure to add in a try-fail cycle to develop those skills. It is incredibly important that your characters aren't just like, hi. And like I said, if they have no skills, make sure they learn those skills. Because even if they start out with no skills, that's fine. But if they start out with no skills and then all of a sudden no karate, your readers are going to be kind of upset. Whereas if they learn karate through a lot of hard work and diligence, that can be a really cool character arc, right? So it's important that you let these qualities help us know as a reader who they are. And make sure that they are unique. Even if you have 2 or 3 characters that, for instance, know how to build certain mechanical ware or things like that, make sure that they all have different interests. One of them might be interested in being a mechanic because of the fact that their dad used to work on cars. Another one might be interested in being a mechanic because of the fact that they find engineering fascinating. Another one might want to be a mechanic because it was the only way that they felt they could get out of their small town, was to build a car and get out. You know, who knows? You don't know what their story is. So even if you have different ideas that start the skill, they can all have the same skill, and that helps them to build together and to talk about it and to talk about, like I said, those backstory elements that make each one of them memorable, even if they all have similar traits. All right. So, one thing to avoid, I can spell. One thing that you want to avoid, for sure, Well, there are multiple things that we've talked about, but one thing that you definitely want to avoid when I say making characters unique, that's what I've been talking about today, is the they're not like other girls / boys trope. We all are familiar with this trope to some level.
It's like, I mean, you can make them different, but don't have them talk about it all the time.
Right. Even if they know that they're different, they might feel self-conscious about being different. They might feel like, hey, I am not like this other specific girl, but there's no way she's not like any other girl on the planet. Yes, we are all unique individuals, but you're going to have similarities to other people on this planet.
Well,
and that's in some ways why they're not like other girls / boys trope bothers us so much, is because of the fact that makes them completely unrelatable. And then the parts that feel relatable, you're like, well, you are like other girls because you're just like me. Yes.
Do you think that this, I don't want to say issue, but let's face it.
It's an issue. Yeah, it
it's
is.
kind of an issue with this trope. Is that like it's more the tone of the writing that's like, oh, this and the author's fault versus like the character. Like you could have a character be what the character is, but it's just the author like describing it or like.
I would agree with that. Part of it is they actually say the term. They aren't like other girls / boys,
Sometimes.
Which is a direct issue. That's a straight up cliche. However, even if they don't say that, sometimes the issue is the fact that they're trying to make them so unique that they become completely and utterly either unrelatable or, like you said, the parts where they are relatable, you're like, wait, but I relate to them, so clearly they're not that weird. So I agree. I do think it is an author issue that the way you write it is the main problem. You can make a character unique without making it like, oh, they're so unique.
Like Nico D'Angelo.
Yeah, that's fair. Nico D'Angelo.
Like he's not very relatable to a lot of people. But
oh no, yeah, I haven't built a dragon.
But he's
out of mechanical parts. No.
But like the thing is, it's like he's just really well written. Like if you had the exact same character, that's just like different.
I'm so different. Yes. Then it's the tone. You make sure that the reader knows they're different, but then when they relate to them, that's okay. Showing that they're different from other people doesn't have to be like an angsty thing. It can be just they're different thing. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, what about when the character's looking somewhere and you're saying that that's like no one thing or that before?
That is a great question. It depends on the context. If they are strangers, then that makes sense. Being like, oh, they seem very unique and different and like no one I've ever met before. That makes sense if they're strangers. If they're like best friends and they're like no one I've ever met before, it's like at this point you know them well enough. You shouldn't be thinking that. And if you are, buddy, they're not your best friend. I don't know who you've been talking to, but you don't know this person. So it's more the context. If you're gonna say like, they're like no one I've ever met before, you can absolutely say that to a stranger. But if you're gonna say that to a best friend, that feels weird because you should by now know how they are similar to other people. Because like I said, no one is truly 100% unrelatable to anyone else. Like, for example, I like Percy Jackson. Several of you like Percy Jackson. Several of you don't like Percy Jackson, probably.
What?
That's okay. Scared. But that being said, I think the issue comes with this trope. More when you try to show their uniqueness over and over and over and over and over again. Instead of just being like, hey, they're a person too, you're specifically saying they are a unique person. They're no longer relatable, they are just a unique person. Stand-in, cardboard cutout, unique person. So I think the issue is more the perseveration on that fact. Unfortunately, I have not read this, but I have had people who have read this that tell me this is a chronic problem with Twilight.
Oh, yes.
Where it's a good book. It's honestly well written. But the problem is that it does run into this not like other girls trope. When in reality, there's a lot of things that she does that actually are like other girls. And that's okay. You don't have to be perfectly unique in order to be a great character. In some ways, if she just embraced the fact that Bella was kind of normal, that would have been better. Because it's okay to be normal. It's okay to have normal average things. Yes, you're unique as a person, and that's fantastic, but it's okay to also have things that you like that other people also like, that you can relate to. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, we're moving on. So, next we're going to talk about secrets and surprises. This is important with your plot. However, it is most important with your characters. Why? Because ultimately, you don't want to know everything about your character from the get-go. You absolutely want to be learning new things along the way. For example, we're returning to After the Last Airbender because it's on my brain today, apparently. You don't know what Zuko has been through when you start the story. You have zero idea about what this kid has been through. You just know that he's a pain. But by the end of the story, you've learned so many secrets and been surprised by him so many times that you have grown to appreciate him as a character. And it's the same thing with all the other characters. Sokka, in the very beginning, you do not know a lot of his backstory. You do not know a lot of the things that Sokka and Katara and Aang and all those guys have been through. However, they develop it over time. They don't just say, here's a whole backstory, page 1. They slowly give you those secrets and surprises revealed throughout the story. The more you can reveal throughout the plot and throughout the story, the better. And the more unique your character seems because they feel like a real person. Let's be honest. Have you ever met a real person who has walked up to you and said, here's my whole life story in 10 seconds? No. And if you have, they're unusual, and they truly may fit the unlike other boys/girls trope. Because I've never met a person who has done that.
Honestly, I kind of want.
You're like, now I want to be the person
stranger.
who's like, whole backstory right now.
My psychology teacher actually did. He shared the story with us, and he's like, I lived this whole guy's life in about 8 minutes.
You're like,
And
all right then.
he was kind of insane, but regardless.
But, yeah, so it can happen, but it's not likely, right? The average person does not do this. And that is part of the reason why, as a reader, we don't like that. Because it doesn't feel like we're naturally getting to know the character. It feels like the author is just saying, here's a cardboard cutout, let me tell you about him. Rather than with discovering it along the way, it feels like you're sitting across from them, maybe, eating lunch and being like, I really like that specific thing too. Why do you like it? Oh, well, I like it because of this and this and that, right? It feels like a much more natural progression of an actual relationship with a real person. And that's what's going to make your characters stand out, is feeling like they are a real person. All right, last one. Speaking of making them a real person, inner thoughts. Now, the problem you may run into if you are writing in third-person omniscient is you don't do a lot of inner thoughts. But that means that doesn't mean you have to completely avoid doing inner thoughts. Third person limited does inner thoughts, and first person does inner thoughts, right? Third person omniscient is tricky because they don't typically dive super deep into one person's thoughts, because that's typically not what you're supposed to do. However, that does not mean that you cannot show us the inner workings of their thoughts through their actions. For example, if someone offered me ice cream and I hesitated, that tells you something's going on in my head. You may not know what's going on in my head, but that tells you something. Because usually most people say, heck yeah, I'll have some ice cream. That tells you multiplicity of things that could be going on in my head, that then when you reveal it to another character later through dialogue, you go, oh, that was foreshadowed, that was shown, that was demonstrated even without giving us inner thoughts. So, inner thoughts, incredibly important, incredibly useful. But if you are doing third person omniscient, just remember, foreshadowing is your best friend. All right. So, any questions about making your characters unique or any of the things that we have talked about before I turn off the lesson for today? Yes, question.
Unique, appearances, even if it's not, a comic or a show.
Yeah.
in a story like a very like a description that wouldn't be given out to like any other character.
Okay, what do you have questions about with that?
Like what kind of clothes or hair, like not the clothes or hair itself. Or
So you mean what specifically is the question? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
like the like unique patterns of the clothes, or like how they did their hair, or maybe
Those are all incredibly important things to add, for sure. I would say that make sure there's always a reason for it. That's the only issue, is that sometimes people are like, oh, they wear cheetah print just because. And it's like, why though? tell me why this character does
because
this.
a cheetah trampled their grandma and they're all cheetahs.
There we go. Or alternatively, they could be like, I love cheetah spots because of my grandma, and she used to wear them all the time, and it reminds me of her. You know. But anyway, point being that you can have a multiplicity of different reasons for having a very unique appearance. Or like, for example, if your character dyes their hair bright blue, maybe it's because they have a twin and they're tired of being mistaken for their twin, and so they're like, bright blue it is.
Like bright blue.
So, or alternatively, if you're having like an alien race or species, you can absolutely say, you know, their face is kind of like a, you know, giant insect or something like that. Wow. That gives us a very unique kind of like, okay, but then you also can develop it by saying, what kind of giant insect? Is it a dragonfly? Is it an ant? You know?
Dragonfly would be so fun to ride on the back of it. Oh, it's
but
like dragons,
anyway,
but
I'm not sure if I answered your question.
you answered it.
Okay. Because I'm always happy to have you clarify if you're like, that wasn't quite what I was.
It's pretty much like giving a detail about like a hair or clothing because of a reason. Like because your grandma had something similar. It's like a backstory for something similar.
Yeah, I would say the best way to wind that in is later. Don't introduce that right up front. So for example, if they wear cheetah print because it reminds them of their grandmother because their grandma loves cheetah print or something like that, you don't have to say that right away. You just say they're wearing a cheetah print dress, and then the reader goes, huh, that's unusual. And then later when they're talking to their best friend, maybe they go like, why can't you wear anything else? Like so much cheetah print. And then they go, well, it's because of my grandma. And then the other person goes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Like that's cool, you know.
Or you could have them like messing with the edge or something, and then
This
it's
is
like,
true.
boom, memory of grandma.
This is true. You can also totally use memories if you're going to do like, hey, they're fidgeting with their dress and they remember getting this hole in their dress when they played this specific sport or something like that. Like that would be cool. So typically you want to make sure it's throughout the story and throughout the action, not just all given at once. Any other questions regarding making characters unique and interesting? Yes.
Is there a way I can make the characters relatable, like through the story? That's like the story is very, very like unique. Like it's not really relatable, like plot.
Right, kind of like fantasy.
Yeah. It's not like
none of us have ever gone and tamed a dragon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Wish I had.
And that's
Have
like
not.
kind of a lot of their personality is what they went through. Like let's say they are a dragon tamer, and that's like a lot of their personality.
All
Is
right.
there still a way we can
I'm
keep
going
them
to use
relatable?
Zuko as an example. Who finds Zuko relatable at some level? Raise your hand.
I have not watched
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would recommend watching it because he is a great example. If you were to talk about his life in literal detail, he's able to control fire. He is a young, basically general in charge of a whole ship. Most of us have not been general of a ship at 16, exiled from our country, forced to chase after a magical being, and wield fire. Last time I checked. But he's relatable because of the fact that you can relate on a deeper level. He feels rejected. He feels like his parents don't accept him. He feels like he ultimately will never be good enough. Those are all feelings we can relate to and that we can deeply feel, even though his experiences literally are not something we can relate to. Does that make sense? So it's about the deeper emotion behind it. What do they feel when they are riding a dragon? What do they feel when they are being tortured to death in a chamber. I don't know about you, but I've never been tortured. I don't feel that. However,
Or have you?
wow, I'd be shocked if that was the case, because I wouldn't know about it. But anyway, that being said, you can create a fantasy or a science fiction story that is drastically different from our actual life and still have it be relatable because they have real human emotions they're feeling behind the unrelatable experiences. Was that helpful?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Any other questions about making your characters unique/memorable? We all good? Cool. Then I will turn off the video. Please, just quick reminder that for the 2024 Scary Story Contest, everything is due by next Saturday. Not this Saturday, next Saturday, October 12th. That is the deadline. We also have a fun, fantastic writing conference coming up. I don't know if there are any seats left, but I would highly recommend asking the front desk if there are any seats left. I have no idea if there are any seats left, but go ahead and give it a shot. See if there are. I will be there on October 12th, so it should be fun. Not just because I'm there, but in general, it should be a fun event. I've talked to my coworkers about it. Sounds delightful. Beyond that, we have the first chapter contest coming up in November. They will be due on the last day of November, and then the Cozy Mystery Contest coming up that will be due on the 21st of December. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to either comment on this video if you're watching, or alternatively ask me once I finish recording. So, but thank you for coming.